CPTSD in men. When you hear the title of this video, you may have focused on the familiar letters, PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder can be a debilitating mental condition brought on by enduring or witnessing a traumatic experience. CPTSD adds the word complex in front of that experience for a good reason. Someone with CPTSD has suffered long-term and chronic trauma, and that makes the condition and recovering from it more complex. Traumatic experiences that tend to lead to CPTSD often include repeated or prolonged physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Some of the men that I've worked with braved the chronic fear of being raised by a mentally ill or drug addicted parent. Others grew up in homes that regularly exploded with violence. But there are other, even more extreme conditions which are sources of ongoing trauma for men. These include kidnapping, slavery, prostitution, and more. In casual conversation, PTSD is often associated with soldiers. CPTSD often is frequently connected to women who were sexually abused as children. However, of course, there's much more to consider with both these disorders. As it pertains to CPTSD, it's important not to dismiss the fact that men get CPTSD too. Males and CPTSD. The numbers may not be well known, but they are no less shocking. Listen to this. At least 1 in 6 boys are sexually assaulted before the age of 18. In at least 1/3 of these cases, that abuse is carried out by a family member. Boys are also made victims of prostitution, and the average age of a male in prostitution is 11 or 12 years old, depending upon the study. Studies also show that men are very unlikely to tell anyone if they have experienced sexual abuse or assault. Men who've undergone any kind of trauma as children are found to suffer greatly as adults. They are far more likely to smoke, more likely to become alcoholics, become addicted to drugs, more likely to engage in risky sexual behaviors. Such men are typically more obese. They struggle with anxiety, panic attacks, and depression. In addition, male adults who were victimized by ongoing trauma in childhood are far more vulnerable to developing complex post-traumatic stress disorder. CPTSD and men, 5 ways to know if you're affected. The first way is shame. Men are conditioned to behave stoically, and many of us will do anything to avoid looking weak or vulnerable, and this leads many men to do whatever it takes to avoid their feelings. Nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, these are all common symptoms of CPTSD. And if you're a man, the first tip off that you're dealing with it might be that you have an unusually strong sense of shame. You might feel embarrassed to admit that what happened to you affected you at all and is still causing problems. Many men have shared with me that they also feel guilt, as if the abuse that they suffered was somehow their fault. The second sign is repressed emotions. Many men who are coping with the aftermath of trauma have a deeply held and unquestioned belief that feelings are dangerous. And so they've learned to do whatever it takes to avoid feeling them. A common offshoot of shame is stuffing down one's feelings. So if showing emotions is the equivalent of weakness, some men will choose numb detachment instead. To outsiders, they may even seem cold or uncaring. Even with loved ones, A man in this scenario is unable to display affection and love, instead relying solely on humor or intellect or work to connect with others. The next sign is acting out in anger. And this is the other side of the coin to numbness. As a man, sometimes we choose the more socially acceptable way of showing emotion, displaying anger. Now, you've endured horrendous experiences, but you might not know what to do with this reality. So, what can happen is that you take it out on others, and usually those others are people who have to take it from you. The next sign is lack of trust. If you're hurt by someone close to you, and particularly if that happens at a young age, it only stands to reason that you'd be pretty slow to trust others as you enter adulthood. Sadly, this the very symptoms of CPTSD in men are often what prevents them from getting help. The final sign is unwillingness to ask for help. All of the above signs add up to this one. You might be ashamed of your emotions and do what you can to push them aside. And instead of expressing thoughts and feelings and talking, you suppress your feelings. And as we've mentioned, maybe act out in rage. This might be because you're afraid to trust anyone enough to let them know what you're dealing with. You keep others at arm's length. This is a recipe for avoiding the very help that is going to guide you to recovery. Remember, help can be safe and helpers can be trustworthy. If you or a man you know is struggling with these types of unfair burdens, it's important to know that the right kind of therapy will help you put the past behind you, but do that in a healthy way. Over the last few decades, we in mental health have learned a lot about how psychological trauma affects all the different levels of our being. We know that it affects the way our nervous system functions, the way we relate to others, the way our emotions work, and it even has profound effects on our physical health. Many men have also shared with me that the trauma that they've been through even damaged their spiritual lives. Here's what to do. Find a seasoned trauma therapist, ideally, someone who knows how to treat complex trauma. This is important because I can't even begin to tell you the number of clients I've worked with who had therapy that didn't really help them at all. They went in circles, and in some cases, even though everybody was well intended, their mental and emotional health got worse. Sometimes this was because they were working with someone who was a generalist and who had none of the advanced training and none of the experience that's necessary to guide someone through the process of healing CPTSD. That's training and experience that most mental health clinicians don't get. So, if you want to learn more about overcoming CPTSD, you can learn a lot more by spending time with my trauma treatment blog. It's there for you, and it's located at www.michaelgquirke.com. It covers trauma symptoms and approaches to treating trauma, and I hope that you find it helpful.